Hello, history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. The most unimaginable torture methods inflicted upon women date back to the Middle Ages, a time when cruelty was often justified by superstition, ignorance, and deeply ingrained prejudices. Medieval society wielded horrific tools and gruesome techniques, from inserting searing iron objects to painfully mutilating sensitive parts of women's bodies. By the end, you may find yourself chilled to the core as we uncover the shocking brutality hidden within history. The Spanish donkey. The Spanish donkey, also known as the wooden horse, was one of the most dreaded torture devices of its time. This device, named for its resemblance to a donkey, was actually a triangular wooden beam with a sharp, pointed edge on top. The victim, usually a woman, was forced to straddle this beam, with her body weight pressing down directly on the sharp edge. Often used as punishment for alleged sexual crimes, this torture was designed to be as humiliating as it was painful. The Spanish donkey's cruelty was amplified by the addition of weights tied to the victim's legs. This increased the downward force, pressing her harder against the edge, causing excruciating pain and, eventually, deep cuts that led to severe bleeding. Victims could suffer for hours, with each movement causing new agony. The torture was intended to be both physically damaging and psychologically devastating, as the prolonged suffering without immediate death left the victim in a constant state of dread and agony. Crushed by an elephant. The use of elephants in torture and execution was common in parts of Asia, particularly in India and Southeast Asia, for centuries. Elephants were considered symbols of strength and power, and their training included the ability to carry out commands related to punishment. In cases where rulers or authorities wanted to make a public example of someone, especially a woman accused of serious crimes or disobedience, they would order her to be crushed by an elephant. This method involved tying the woman down to a large, flat stone, her body immobilized to prevent any attempt to escape. A trained elephant would then be commanded to step on her, typically starting with the limbs before moving to the head or chest. The crushing weight of the elephant, often over 5,000 pounds, would obliterate bones, causing almost instant death. Witnessing this punishment was a terrifying experience for onlookers, as the sight of an elephant crushing a human was meant to deter others from challenging authority. The elephants used in this process were trained to understand the commands, and were often seen as instruments of justice or wrath. The nagging leash. In medieval Europe, women who were outspoken, complained often, or gossiped were branded as nagging or scolds. This was particularly true for women who openly criticized or questioned their husbands or male family members. As a means of silencing such women, authorities devised the nagging leash, a form of punishment meant to shame and humiliate rather than outright kill. The nagging leash was an iron mask that fully covered the head, locking the woman's face and sometimes pressing a metal piece onto her tongue. The mask was often heavy, making it difficult for her to move her head. The most humiliating part of this punishment was that it forced women to walk around in public with this mask, drawing the attention and scorn of others. The metal covering not only prevented speech, but also made breathing uncomfortable. Wearing the mask for extended periods could cause injuries to the head and neck. The nagging leash left its victims scarred emotionally and sometimes physically, serving as a constant reminder of the harshness of society's expectations and restrictions on women. Saw torture. Saw torture was one of the most horrifying ways to die, reserved for those accused of severe crimes such as witchcraft, heresy, or treason. For women, accusations of witchcraft were especially common, often based on suspicion or mere rumor. In this method, the victim would be hung upside down, with her legs spread apart and her head closest to the ground. This position allowed blood to pool in her head, keeping her conscious longer and ensuring she felt the pain of each cut. The torturers would then start sawing through her body, beginning at the groin area and working their way downward. The process was slow and excruciating, as every tooth of the saw dug into her flesh. The goal was to prolong her agony, with the victim remaining alive and aware for as long as possible. Without any form of anesthesia, this method was not only painful, but also terrifying, as each movement of the saw brought her closer to death. Saw torture served as a powerful deterrent, reinforcing the strict social and religious codes of the time. The breaking wheel. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was a popular torture device across medieval Europe, used on both men and women. This device was a large wooden wheel with spaces between the spokes. A condemned woman would be tied to the wheel with her arms and legs stretched out, positioning her limbs over the spaces. Executioners would then use a heavy iron bar to shatter her bones, sometimes starting with her arms and moving down to her legs. The breaking wheel did not always result in immediate death. Often, the woman would be left on the wheel in this broken state, suffering from her injuries while exposed to the elements. This could go on for days, with the victim dying slowly from shock, blood loss, or infection. In some cases, the wheel would be displayed upright, with the tortured body visible to the public as a reminder of the consequences of defying authority. This form of torture was both a physical and psychological nightmare, stripping the victim of dignity and leaving her to suffer before a watching crowd. Dunking stool. The dunking stool was commonly used to punish women accused of witchcraft, gossip, or other unruly behavior. The device consisted of a wooden chair fixed to the end of a long lever or beam, much like a seesaw. The accused woman would be strapped into this chair, unable to free herself. Then, the chair would be repeatedly dunked into a river, lake, or pond, holding her underwater for a few seconds before lifting her back up. Each dunk would leave the woman gasping for air, drenched, and shivering in the cold water. The torture could continue until the woman nearly drowned or became too weak to struggle. In some cases, the prolonged exposure to cold water led to hypothermia. The goal was both to punish and to humiliate, as crowds often gathered to watch and mock the woman as she was dunked. For many, this torture was particularly terrifying because it carried the constant threat of drowning. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden is one of the most notorious torture devices, often depicted in movies and literature. Though its actual historical use is debated, the device was designed to be as terrifying as possible. Shaped like a tall, upright coffin, the Iron Maiden was lined with spikes on the inside. When a victim was forced inside, the door would close, pressing the spikes into their body. The spikes were arranged to pierce flesh but avoid vital organs, ensuring that the victim would suffer greatly without immediately dying. Trapped inside, the woman would experience intense pain, with the spikes pressing deeper into her body as she moved. The lack of air, combined with the inability to escape, would cause panic and eventual death. The Iron Maiden symbolized the absolute power of authority, as it was a punishment reserved for those who dared to challenge the strict laws and beliefs of the time. The breast ripper. The breast ripper, sometimes known as the iron spider, was specifically used to torture women accused of adultery, heresy, or witchcraft. This device consisted of iron claws, often heated until red hot. These claws would be clamped onto the woman's breast and then pulled away, tearing the flesh and causing severe damage. The pain was unimaginable, and the injury was often fatal due to blood loss or infection. This method was not only about inflicting physical pain, but also about shaming and degrading the victim. Scarring from this device would mark the woman for life, leaving her permanently disfigured if she survived. The breast ripper represented society's harsh judgment on women's bodies, as well as a means to enforce control through fear. The pair of anguish. The pair of anguish was a small, brutal device used primarily during the Middle Ages as a means of torturing or punishing individuals, especially women, accused of crimes that were often social taboos rather than genuine offenses. This torture instrument, true to its name, was shaped like a pear with a unique mechanical design intended to cause excruciating pain and irreversible damage. It was mainly used on women accused of adultery, heresy, blasphemy, or witchcraft, and its use represented society's extreme punishment for individuals who challenged established norms or beliefs. The pair of anguish was crafted from metal and featured 4 petals or segments that could be expanded outward by twisting a screw at the base. When the screw was turned, the metal petals would slowly separate from each other, pushing outward to widen the device. While the pair was relatively small, it was specifically designed to inflict damage to the soft tissues of the mouth, rectum, or vagina, depending on the nature of the supposed crime or the torturer's intent. Typically, the pair was introduced into one of these body openings, and then the torturer would gradually twist the screw, causing the petals to expand. The slow and careful pace at which the device was operated ensured that the pain would build gradually, making the entire process even more horrific. Unlike other torture devices that inflicted quick and obvious harm, the pair of anguish worked subtly at first, but with devastating results over time. It could take several minutes or even longer for the device to fully expand, giving the torturer complete control over the level of agony inflicted. Burning at the stake. Burning at the stake is one of history's most infamous and terrifying forms of execution, especially associated with the punishment of women accused of witchcraft, heresy, or other socially condemned acts. This brutal punishment involved binding the accused to a tall wooden post, surrounded by bundles of sticks, logs, and other combustible materials, then setting the pyre alight. The victim would be engulfed in flames and subjected to an excruciating death. Burning at the stake was especially common in medieval Europe and was part of public displays, meant to instill fear and reinforce the authority of religious or political institutions. This punishment was often carried out after a lengthy and humiliating trial, where the accused, typically women suspected of witchcraft, faced various forms of coercion or torture to confess to their alleged crimes. The standards of evidence in such trials were shockingly low. Mere suspicion or accusations by others were often enough to seal the accused's fate. Trials for witchcraft or heresy often involved horrific interrogation methods, leading many women to confess just to stop the pain. Unfortunately, such confessions would ultimately lead to a death sentence. In the case of heresy, any deviation from religious doctrine could be construed as a serious offense, punishable by death at the stake. For religious authorities, burning at the stake was seen as a form of purification, symbolizing the burning away of sin or rebellion against God. As we wrap up our journey, we invite you to share your thoughts. Did any of their stories surprise you? Please like this video and subscribe for more captivating content. Thank you for joining us on this adventure.